Today we're going to look at how we classify stories, the genres and subgenres of writing. So the first thing we want to look at with genres and subgenres is the text itself. And so when we look at the text, we can break it down into a major area like a genre, and then you're going to make it a more specific area, and we call that a subgenre. So say, for example, your text was a banana. Now, where do we put it in a classification, a genre? Well, a banana is a food. That would be its general classification. Now, if we want to become more specific, that would be our subgenre. So instead of just calling banana a food, we call bananas a fruit. We do the same with texts. Say if we go to the library and we find a Harry Potter book, we would put it in its genre, its general classification as fiction. A Harry Potter book is a fictional book. However, fiction is a pretty big genre, and we'll split it into a more specific category, a subgenre. A Harry Potter book is not only in the fiction genre, it is a fantasy subgenre. So when we look at what a genre is, we have several that we go through. So let's start off with what fiction can be. Well, fiction is creative or imaginary writing. A lot of times I tell my students, fiction means fake. Fiction means it did not happen. It is not realistic. NonFiction, with the N-O-N in front of the word, is writing that is true or factual. Nonfiction, you're getting stories about real people or events that existed or happened. We also have folklore. Folklore are stories that were once passed down orally. 9 times out of 10, folklore's got to have some sort of moral, some sort of value, some sort of lessons being learned at the end. We see that a lot of times happening in our fiction as well, but our folklore starts as an oral tradition. Dramas are plays or scripts. Usually we have to see them performed on a stage or up on a screen. Poetry is writing that is concerned with the beauty of language. So usually when we look at the idea of poetry, we're not looking at carrying through a specific theme. We're not looking at specifically carrying through a particular plot. You should be concerned mostly with the language on hand. What words are being used in order to describe? That's usually what poetry is looked at for first and foremost. Now, we're going to focus in this particular section on the first 3, on fiction, nonfiction, and folklore. So when we try to take our big fiction genre and break it down into subgenres, we're going to look at the sense of realistic fiction, the fiction that is still fake. It did not happen, but it feels like it can. It's pretty realistic. We also have historical fiction in which it is still a fake or a story that is made up, but we are going to use historical events, maybe historical names of people, and then just go off of their particular stories or their lives and create a fictional story with them. And then also in fiction, we have science fiction and fantasy, where we have completely made up worlds, completely made up characters. And usually in science fiction, we usually see some sort of technology or some sort of movement of time. With fantasy, usually we see some sort of magic, some sort of creatures or monsters, usually non-human, interacting with human characters. And so here are our 4 different types. Again, realistic fiction are stories that could be true but aren't. Our historical fiction is a made-up story that's set around a real event or a person from history. We have science fiction, like I said, had advanced technology, usually set in the future or the past. And then fantasies have monsters, magic, supernatural powers that usually interact with the humanity. Nonfiction also has its subgenres. We can start off with the ideas of biography and autobiography because both of those work with people. You want to learn more about a person in biography and autobiographies. The difference between those is an autobiography is written by the person that you're learning about. That person had to take a part in their own story and is telling you their own story. A biography is a story about a person, but somebody else wrote it. We also have informational writing. Informational writing is where you are trying to teach or to try to learn about a specific topic, usually a how-to. Maybe you're learning a little bit more about some sort of history or some sort of science. And persuasive writing has to have an argument. There should be a belief or an opinion stated, and it's backed up usually by some sort of supports or evidence. And again, let's look at those four, where we have got the autobiography, where one's life story is written by somebody themselves. The biography is one life story written by somebody else. Our informational writing provides facts or information. You are being taught something, like a how-to. And persuasive writing is meant to influence the reader. They're going to give you a belief or an opinion, and they're going to back it up with support. Now, the folklore subgenres, we've got several of those. We've got fables, tall tales, legends, myths, and the fairy tales themselves. So as you can see, a fable definitely has to have a moral to the story, and it's going to be clearly stated. Now, a fable is a short story, usually with talking animals, where you're going to have an animal being personified as a human being. The lesson of the story, the moral of the story, is clearly stated. Matter of fact, usually they even put it at the very end as a conclusion, where they say the moral of the story is this. Now, a myth usually has some sort of mythical creature that has supernatural powers. A lot of times when we talk about myths, it has gods, it has goddesses. It could be a creation story, whether or not it's a creation of the earth itself, or creation of a kingdom, or a creation of just a specific place. A tall tale is a funny story that is usually set in the American Wild West. When we talk about the Wild West, we're not just talking about cowboys, we're talking about as America started moving off west into the pioneering days. So long as it is in some sort of rural or pioneering kind of ideals of the American West, that's where the tall tale is usually set. And then the main character's size or skill is quite exaggerated. They're called tall tales because the story is very much unbelievable. It is definitely a part of fiction. A fairy tale, like a fantasy, would have magic, but it also has talking animals. Fairy tales are very short stories. Usually when you talk about fairy tales, they're usually written for children, but you have a very short, very quaint, very sweet story that includes magic and talking animals. And then a legend. A legend is a story that might have elements of truth to it. And maybe perhaps the person that the story is about is real. They actually existed. However, it's a legend because something has been exaggerated. Maybe their skills are being exaggerated. Maybe the people that they have met or the places that they have been has been exaggerated. So the story has elements of truth to it, but it has to be exaggerated in order for it to fit into our sense of fantasy. So let's look a little bit more at fairy tales and fantasies. So they both have monsters, magic, and talking animals. So what's the difference? Well, fairy tales are part of the oral tradition. Again, like I said, they're quite short. Usually they are told in order to tell some sort of lesson to younger people. Usually you might even see when you look at it as it's a television or a movie appearance, or if you look at the book themselves, usually it actually say retold by or adapted by. The story has been around for a very long time. Fairy tales often start with that classic once upon a time. So how are we going to identify if it's a major genre like it's fiction? Is it nonfiction? Is it folklore? Well, we want to look for details that start revealing the subgenre, because we have more specifics in the subgenres. If you start realizing those particular elements, then you're going to be able to figure out what the main genre is and then figure out what the subgenre is. Now, let's practice a little and see if we can identify not only the genre, the major umbrella under which a story would go, but the specific one, the subgenre as well. So let's look at our first story called The Lion and the Mouse, being retold by Jerry Pinkney. A lion was sleeping when a mouse woke him up. The lion was about to eat him when the mouse said, "Free me and I shall never forget it." Who knows? I may help you someday." The lion laughed so much at the idea of the mouse being able to help him that he let him go. Sometime later, the lion was caught in a hunter's trap. The little mouse happened to pass by, and seeing the trapped lion, he gnawed through the ropes and freed him. Your moral of the story is little friends can be a big help. Since we have a moral of a story, since we actually have a retold or adapted by Jerry Pinkney as the author here, I have a feeling we're in the fantasy section and we have got oral tradition here, don't we? Yep, you've got a fable or a fairy tale here. Let's try another one. War Brides by Helen Bryan. 1939. As Britain prepares for war with Germany in World War II, the lives of 5 young women are about to collide in a sleepy Sussex village. Together they will face hardship, passion, and danger, forming bonds of friendship that will inspire a desperate plan, and 50 years later, an act of revenge. Now, quite a bit of this tells me I'm looking at nonfiction because I do have a little bit of background where I know in 1939, Great Britain would be preparing for war with Germany in World War II. But that's where my facts stop. As I continue reading about the rest of the story, now all of a sudden I've got a story about 5 young women far away from the war front, and we're looking at their particular lives as they kind of collide together. So even though this sounds like it might be real, we're actually in fiction here. This is historical fiction under the fiction genre, where we do have realistic events that are going on. We do have realistic facts being used here. But because the fictitious 5 young ladies here are taking precedence, because they're the most important, this is fiction, this is historical fiction. Next, we have The Adventures of Robin Hood, which has been adapted by Howard Pyle. In this work, Pyle sorts through the many folk tales concerning the mythical Robin Hood, who may have been a real person, and made them suitable for children. Robin Hood's dashing acts of wealth redistribution from the rich to the poor have captured the imagination and fascination of millions of delighted readers through the ages. So there's no moral to this story, but I do see an adapted by, and of course it actually gives it away in the first sentence. We have a folk tale here where Robin Hood has actually been seen in several different genres, several different countries, and being adapted again and again as a story. So we take The Adventures of Robin Hood as a folk tale. Our next story, The Best Book of Sharks by Claire Llewellyn. This beautiful book offers insight into the deep-sea lives of one of nature's deadliest killing machines. Learn where sharks live, what they feed on, and how they bear their young. Well, sharks are not made-up fantasy creatures. They are real. So already I'm kind of looking towards the genre of nonfiction. So when we think of the 4 different parts of nonfiction that we have, it's not an autobiography or a biography. We're not looking at specific people. But it looks like we're about to learn about sharks. We're going to get more information about them. How are they nature's deadliest killing machines? What kind of deep sea lives do they live? What do they feed on? How they bear their young? This is nonfiction. And it is informative nonfiction. You're getting information. You're learning more about sharks. One more. Escape from Earth, Oasis by Ivis Bo Davis. Leave Earth or die. The electromagnetic field around the Earth is fading away. Soon the planet will burn and everything and everyone on the planet will die. Deep space vessel Triznov is the first human interstellar colony ship, and she's nearly ready to launch in search of a new habitable planet to colonize among the stars. Well, we are going off into space. We do have astronauts. We do have space stations that probably people could live on for quite a bit of time. However, we aren't quite that technologically proficient as yet where we need to leave the Earth permanently. So I have a feeling we're going into the fiction genre with Escape from Earth Oasis. And Escape from Earth Oasis is science fiction underneath the fiction genre. Our subgenre is science fiction. Remember, science fiction deals a lot with technology. A lot of times you're finding yourself in the future, and sometimes you might even come across an alien or two. Thank you so much for stopping by today to have an introduction to genres and subgenres. If you like what you see, please leave me a comment. Let me know what else you'd like to learn more about. And if you could subscribe to the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for stopping by.